are very pleased to welcome to campus Gil Hoffman, who is the Chief Political Correspondent and Analyst with the Jerusalem Post. He'll be speaking on peace, politics, and plutonium, an insider's look at the quest for security, democracy, and peace in the Middle East. As you probably know, if you've been to other Kennedy Center events, March is an incredibly busy time. I believe there are 5 different things going on today, including an all-day conference called the Inquiry Conference, which for those of you who have received an ORCA or who have done undergraduate research, I'd encourage you just to stop by for a few minutes at some point this Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in the Kennedy Center. The Inquiry Conference will be essentially your peers who have completed fieldwork research, and it's a chance for them to report on their research from 10 a.m. to about 4 p.m. every day. Also, I won't go through all of the upcoming events and activities that are going on at the Kennedy Center, but just so you know, you can follow us on Facebook or follow our RSS feed. If you go to our website at kennedy.byu.edu, not only will you find the PDF lecture flyers for all of the upcoming events, you can find under the events tab almost all of our previous lectures. So hundreds and hundreds of lectures. You could download or watch the video, download the podcast, or you can sign up to follow us on iTunes. So we know you're busy. I know there's a lot going on, but pretty certain that there will be a number of other events based on your interests today that would be of interest and possibly helpful both in your classwork and as you prepare to make a way for yourself after graduation. So we'd like to begin with an opening prayer, as is our custom, and we've asked Eric Sackett, who's a PR major from Orem, Utah, to offer that prayer. And then I'd like to turn the time over to Professor Joel Campbell, Professor of Communications and co-organizer of today's lecture, who will introduce our speaker.
Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Gil Hoffman today. I'm just going to read a short biography. I've had a chance to ride down with him from Salt Lake this morning, and I'm very excited to hear what he has to tell us about his work. Gil Hoffman is a chief political correspondent and analyst for the Jerusalem Post, well connected to Israeli and Palestinian leaders. Hoffman has interviewed every major figure across the Israeli political spectrum, has been interviewed by top media on 6 continents, and is a regular analyst on CNN, Al Jazeera, and other news outlets. Called the most optimistic man in Israel by Israel Television, his writing and TV appearances provide a behind-the-scenes look at the intrigue and humor in the Israeli political arena. Hoffman, who was raised in Chicago, graduated magna cum laude from Northwestern University School of Journalism and wrote for the Miami Herald and the Arizona Republic before moving to Israel. A reserve soldier in the IDF spokesman's unit, he has lectured in 7 countries and more than 40 U.S. states. That number's growing, he tells me. He's got only like 4 states left to get to. Hoffman lives in Jerusalem with his wife and 2 children. Join me in welcoming Gil Hoffman.
There we go. That's home. Thank you so much, Joel, and thank you to all the organizers of this event, and thank you to the students. Please feel free to come in. You've made me feel very much at home here. So it's an honor and pleasure for me to be speaking at BYU. I just don't understand how anyone, when it's so beautiful here in Provo, how anyone studies here. It's just, I know I wouldn't be able to. So more power to you that you can. As you see here on the map, I come from a region that's not always pleasant for Israel. We wish we had the neighbors that you have here in Utah. Instead of what we have there, you don't have to squint if you're in the back. The yellow countries are the ones that don't like my country very much. That's all. And yet, in spite of Israel being surrounded by so many countries that would prefer that it not exist, that would prefer that there not be the one Jewish state in the world, that there would be a 58th Muslim state instead, we're thriving. You know, Israel has become a high-tech powerhouse that has more startups per capita than any country in the world right now, where all the top Fortune 500 companies are making sure to have their top international R&D facilities in Israel, whether it's Intel or Apple, and more and more opening up every day. And the very fact that this is being accomplished in spite of living in that neighborhood, I think is very impressive. I'm proud to be coming here from Jerusalem, to be able to live in Jerusalem and raise a family there is a blessing from God that I don't take for granted even for a single second. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and they couldn't have even dreamed while they were in the concentration camp that they would have a grandson raising a family in Jerusalem, raising blonde, beautiful children, the ultimate revenge against Hitler. And so I'm coming here, in a sense, representing a country that's doing so well against all odds. And as you heard from the introduction, I have two full-time jobs. One is following around Netanyahu and the other Israeli politicians, and the other is following around my children. And sometimes it feels like it's the same job. But both jobs are very exciting. And in Israel, everything is meaningful. I was talking to Joel on the way here about my experience on September 11th that I think shows how strong the bond is between Israel and America. That on September 11th, I was covering a mission to Israel of Jewish leaders from New York and New Jersey, one of whom is currently a senator that was retiring soon, Frank Lautenberg, and I was the one who had to tell them about the Twin Towers being hit. And they had come to Israel to show solidarity with the people in Israel who had been hit by so many suicide bombings at the time. And instead the tables were turned, and the people of Israel showed solidarity with the people of America. And the people of Israel understand the challenges that America faces. And the bond between Israel and the United States has never been closer, even though America doesn't always approve of our choice of politicians, and Israel doesn't always approve of America's choice of presidents either, to put it mildly. I had a little taste of covering American politics. I covered Romney's visit to Israel last summer, and in November, the Jerusalem Post sent me to Chicago to cover Obama's victory party. I got to see a lot of really happy people over there. It seemed like most of them were in the press box. I was talking to the journalists about covering politics in Israel as opposed to covering politics in America. I said to them, on the one hand, they have it a little bit easier because they're covering only two political parties. I'm from Chicago, where you even only have one political party. In Israel, we have 34, of which 12 got elected in the election on January 22nd. But on the other hand, our election in Israel lasts only 3 months long, while your election in America seems to last 3 years. So I think that I have it a little bit better. For me, I got interviewed a lot ahead of the election in Israel. And for me, it was interesting to see how the international media got the Israeli election so wrong. The media kept on asking me, why are Israelis moving to the right? Remember, in Israel, left and right, and unlike America, it's defined on only one issue, on the Palestinian issue. So we define left as the people who are most interested in being generous to the Palestinians in any kind of final status agreement, and the right is the people less interested in being generous to the Palestinians in any kind of final status agreement. And so they asked me, why are Israelis moving to the right? Why are they becoming more hawkish? And I said, you know what, I don't agree with your thesis. I don't think that that's what's going to happen. And in fact, it didn't. On election day, we went from having a parliament with 65 seats on the right and 55 on the left to a razor-thin majority, 61 to 59, almost a statistical tie. I said, maybe it would have made sense that Israelis would become more hawkish, because over the last 8 years, we've had 15,000 rockets fall upon Israeli civilians. That's the kind of thing that would make Israelis worried about their security. It would have made sense that Israelis would move to the right because the Palestinians haven't been coming to the negotiating table for the last 4.5 years. And that's the kind of thing that would make them skeptical about there being a peace process. But it didn't happen. And it didn't happen because there are some trends inside Israeli society that affected the election that I think the world missed. Trend number one, the socioeconomic trend. We had, a year and a half ago, on the streets of Israel, 300,000 protesters saying that they want social justice. Even though our economy in Israel is doing relatively well, we weathered the international economic crisis better than most Western nations. We have a high cost of living in Israel that has made it especially hard for the young people to get their start. And we have a large gap between rich and poor, third largest gap between rich and poor out of any Western nation, after Mexico and the country just to the north of Mexico. And people have gotten frustrated with that. And so they voted on the socioeconomic issue, which they haven't in the past. I know in America, politicians run under the slogan, it's the economy, stupid, right? Well, in Israel, politicians would have to be stupid to bring up the economy because people were voting only on war and peace. People actually were voting the opposite of what made sense for them economically. Poor people were voting for the Likud party, which is a capitalist party. It wants to cut benefits from the poor and help the rich. I'm oversimplifying a bit. And rich people were voting for the Labor Party, which is a socialist party. It wants to cut benefits from the rich and help the poor. People were voting the opposite of what made sense for their wallets because they were voting purely on the Palestinian issue. This election, people went to the polls, held their nose, and voted for a party that they disagree with on the Palestinian issue because they were voting with their wallets. There's room in the front, the speaker doesn't bite or spit. And so that was trend number one that affected the election results in Israel. Trend number two was the trend of matters of religion and state. We have in Israel, demographically, religiously, Israel is surprisingly not a very religious country at all. 30% of Israelis define themselves as secular. 50% define themselves as traditional. Well, what does that mean? It's really a kind of an ethereal concept. If people are self-defining, it just sounds really good, traditional. And the remaining 20%, a slight majority of them, define themselves as modern Orthodox, religious Zionist, which means that they are that they work for a living and while they also learn Torah, study Bible, and they serve in the army in the compulsory draft. A minority of the Orthodox in Israel define themselves as ultra-Orthodox, 9% approximately of the population. And the ultra-Orthodox don't serve in the army. They avoid the compulsory draft because they say that they are learning Torah full-time, and they will learn Torah full-time for the rest of their lives. And Israelis that are not ultra-Orthodox have increasingly seen that as not sharing the burden inside Israeli society, that they're not going to the army where people are putting their children's lives at risk, and people have gotten increasingly frustrated with that, and that affected how people voted as well. The third trend was the trend of frustration with politicians. You have that here too? In Israel, every year there's a very comprehensive poll taken by the Israel Democracy Institute called the Democracy Index, which I recommend that you Google if you want to understand Israelis. It's a poll of 1,000 Israelis were in face-to-face interviews representing a sample of the population, 100 very serious questions. And one of the questions that they ask every year is, what professions do you respect the most and the least? Now, you would expect the politicians to be at the very bottom of the list, but they're actually not. Israelis respect them second least. What profession is respected even less? Anyone want to guess? What? No, not lawyers. That's America. We have in Israel more lawyers per capita than any country in the world, more Jewish lawyers per capita than any state in the world other than New Jersey. But I did hear the answer over there in pink. Journalists, right. The only profession in Israel respected less than politicians are journalists. And as the political correspondent of the Jerusalem Post, I spend most of my time with journalists and politicians, with the scum of the earth, apparently. And so that affected how people voted as well. That the party that was the surprise winner of the election, that got the second most votes after Netanyahu's Likud, was a party called Yesh Atid, which means there is a future, and they had no politicians in its list of candidates. And so all three of these trends affected how people voted. Israelis didn't vote on War and Peace for the first time ever. I got interviewed by the BBC the day before the election. They asked me, what is this election about? I told them the same thing that I told you. They asked me, what is this election not about? And I said, it's not about what you care about in Britain. It's not about settlements. It's not about Palestinians. It's not about the peace process. And so they showed me saying that clip, and then the anchor ended his report by saying, and that doesn't bode well for peace in the Middle East. When I saw the report, I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry, because the remaining 9 minutes and 45 seconds of the 10-minute interview was all about why it does bode well for peace, about the fact that Israelis were voting on issues other than the Palestinian conflict what led to Israel having a much more moderate parliament, and now a much more moderate cabinet that Netanyahu has until next week by law to complete building. In his outgoing coalition, remember in Israel, no one party has ever won a 61-vote majority out of the 120 members of parliament, so they have to have coalitions of parties to run the country together. In the outgoing coalition, there's only 5 members of parliament from left-wing parties. The next government that Netanyahu is in the process of forming, the coalition, will have 27. 27 up from 5. It's a very big difference. And so this government will be uniquely positioned to move the peace process with the Palestinians forward. The first party that Netanyahu brought into his coalition is a party led by our former foreign minister, Tzipi Livni, who will now be in charge of negotiations with the Palestinians again. They've been refusing to come to the table for the last 4 years because they thought that Netanyahu wouldn't give them what his predecessor was willing to give them, that they didn't agree to. Now, with Tzipi Livni being in charge of negotiations, they have really no excuse to not come to the table anymore, even though their leaders have never been proven particularly helpful to their own people. This time, they won't have an excuse to their people to not come negotiate with us. And so we could very well have a peace process very soon after not having a peace process since, not coincidentally, 3 months before Obama got elected President of the United States. The last day that we had a real peace process was August 30th, 2008. On that day, the Prime Minister of Israel, who was Ehud Olmert, offered the Palestinians 100% of the West Bank with land swaps. Very, very big concession. Talking about giving up the biblical heartland of the Jewish people, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our matriarchs as well walked. But Olmert was willing to give up 100% with land swaps. He was willing to take in thousands of Palestinian refugees, even though there were a lot more Jews who were expelled from Arab and Muslim countries when the State of Israel was founded in 1948 than there were Arabs who fled the new Jewish state. And he offered to divide Jerusalem, the heart and soul of the Jewish people. He offered to have the Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem become the capital of a Palestinian state. He offered to have the holy basin of the old city of Jerusalem, where the holy sites are, become internationalized under the control of 5 countries: the United States, the new Palestinian state, Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. That was the offer that the Prime Minister of Israel made to the Palestinians on August 30th, 2008. Had they said yes, Olmert would have brought it to the UN General Assembly the following month, where it would have been approved by 190 countries. But instead, the Palestinians said, that's right, they said nothing. They didn't come back to the table. And now perhaps they finally will. 4 days after the deadline for Netanyahu to form a government, we have an esteemed visitor to Israel. The President of the United States is coming. And while he is in Israel, he will do his best to reach out to the people of Israel. He's not going to be announcing a Middle East peace plan. That can only come in the future after he has regained the trust of Israelis, which he lost over the last 4 years. I've been following very closely what Israelis think about the President of the United States. It's a small enough room, so I can take out some visual aids. I'm a print journalist. I have print visual aids. So the first ever headline that there was with Obama's face on the cover of an Israeli newspaper was this. We have any Hebrew students in the class? Okay. So the headline is "Worries in Jerusalem. Obama is coming closer to the presidency." This was the first week of January 2008, right before he became the leading candidate for president of the United States. But he did more to reach out to Israelis than any American presidential candidate had before. He came to Israel during the campaign, went to Sderot, the town that's been hit by thousands of rockets, and said, if my house were under attack where my 2 daughters sleep at night, I'd do everything possible to stop it. And Israelis really appreciated that. And by the end of the campaign, Israelis saw him differently, to the point that that same newspaper, the headline the day after the election was this. I don't know if you can see, he's looking all angelic over here. We don't normally have an American flag at the top of our newspapers in Israel, believe it or not. And the headline is, Yesh lo chalom, which means he has a dream. Taken after, I guess, the only other African-American leader Israelis had heard of. And so shortly after his inauguration, I told my newspaper we should take polls about what Israelis think about him. And so the first poll was back in May 2009. We asked Israelis, is the Obama administration going to be more pro-Israel, more pro-Palestinian, or neutral? The percentage saying that it was going to be more pro-Israel was 31%. The percentage saying it was going to be more pro-Palestinian was 14%. So he did all right. Not quite as all right as Bush, where the numbers were 88-2. But 31-14 is still pretty good. We're a very red state in Israel. Israelis still, they don't know the difference between Democrats and Republicans. There have been presidents, there have been Democratic presidents that they've liked and not liked, Republican presidents that they've liked and not liked. Israelis loved Bush, but Israelis loved Clinton too, even though they had exact opposite approaches to how to solve the Middle East conflict. Bush had his very hands-off approach to how to solve the Middle East conflict, didn't come to Israel his first 7 years as president. A lot of Israelis liked that. Clinton had his very hands-on approach to how to solve the Middle East conflict, especially when it came to Jewish women. And so Obama did all right in the first poll, but then we took another poll 3 weeks later, in June. Between May and June, a couple things happened. Speech in Cairo. Obama came to Cairo, came to Saudi Arabia, bowed in Saudi Arabia, and in Cairo compared what the Palestinians had been through to the Holocaust. Not the kind of thing that makes Israelis like him. We don't compare anything to the Holocaust. And so there was also a meeting between Netanyahu and Obama in the White House that went badly, where Obama revealed an obsession with settlements that would prevent there from being a peace process, and where there was a very high-profile dispute between Netanyahu and Obama about how things work in the Middle East. Netanyahu said, Mr. President, if you succeed at preventing the nuclearization of Iran, the extremists in the region are defeated and the moderates empowered, and you can make peace in the Middle East. Obama said, no, I see it the other way. When I make peace between Israel and the Palestinians, that will bring the Arab and Muslim world on board to prevent the nuclearization of Iran. Israelis heard this and they said, oy vey, he doesn't get it. We've been trying to make peace between Israel and the Palestinians for a very long time. We can't wait to prevent a crazy man from getting the bomb in Iran. Arab and Muslim leaders heard this And they said whatever the Arabic equivalent is of oy vey, because they said, we weren't telling Obama to help the Palestinians. We were telling him, as WikiLeaks later revealed, cut off the head of the snake. Deal with Iran right now. And so that high-profile difference of opinion and everything, and Obama not coming to Israel when he went to Cairo and Saudi Arabia, made Israelis more skeptical of him. The percentage of Israelis saying that he is more pro-Palestinian than pro-Israel went up from 14% to 50% in 3 weeks. The percentage saying that he's more pro-Israel went down from 31% to only 6%. Obama's advisors saw this. They said, we've lost mainstream Israel. We were counting on mainstream Israel to make concessions. We can't allow this number to get any lower. And in fact, it did. It fell a few months later, only 4%, which if you think about it is almost mathematically impossible. The pull at a margin of error of 4.5%. That meant that there were people who hadn't even been born yet who had a problem with the President of the United States. But then the numbers went up to 10%, to 12%. Then Obama embarked on what was called the charm offensive, where he really tried to reach out to Israelis, where he invited Netanyahu for a good meeting in the White House after a couple of meetings went badly, where he praised Israel up and down in an interview to Israeli TV. He said that Herzl, the visionary of Israel, would be proud if he would see Israel today. He said that he understood the irony in Israel that sometimes it takes the left to make war and the right to make peace. That it takes like somebody like Netanyahu, just like it took Richard Nixon to go to China, it would take somebody like Netanyahu to make peace. There was only one mistake that Obama made in that interview. He was asked a legitimate question. The question was, why don't Israelis like you? And his answer was, maybe it's because my name is Hussein. Bad answer. Israelis don't like to be told that they're racist. They're not. Israelis don't like to be told that they're shallow. Israelis had a problem with his policies. Israelis on the right, who say that Israel has to keep every inch of the land of Israel because it was given to us by God, they wouldn't have liked Obama anyway. Israelis on the left, who say there needs to be 2 states for 2 peoples for Israel's own good, because if not, there'll be a demographic majority soon between the Arabs, of Arabs between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, and then Israel would be defeated democratically and demographically. They were very upset that because of Obama making mistakes, there was no peace process. And that's how you get numbers like that. And so Obama is coming to Israel in order to regain Israelis' trust. And only after that can he announce a Middle East peace plan. And then I think he'll find that Israel is willing to go a long way, but the Palestinian leadership has failed their people time and time again. I'm skeptical. Now, the best way to reach out to Israelis is to reassure them that he will not allow Iran to get a nuclear capability, because that's what Israelis are worried about more than any other issue. And he has not reassured Israelis on that issue yet. In fact, Israelis were very worried the last time they heard Obama speak about it in depth, which was in a foreign policy debate during the election with Romney. Now, I was here in America during that debate, and I saw that the American media and the Israeli media actually reported it in opposite ways. The following day, the papers in the United States said that on the Middle East, Obama and Romney sound exactly alike. You know, they're both mentioning, there are only 3 countries that they mentioned over and over again in a foreign policy debate: China, Iran, and Israel. And it was clear that both of them like us the best out of those 3. But on the Iran issue, Obama and Romney had exact opposite policies. Because from Israeli ears, we heard Obama say that he won't let Iran get a nuclear weapon, and Romney say that he won't let Iran get a nuclear capability. That's not just a nuance in words. That's a difference of about 2 years between Iran getting the ability to build a nuclear weapon in its underground facilities that are not being adequately administered by the International Atomic Energy Association, and them not having a nuclear weapon actually produced. And so Israelis are still quite worried by what Obama has said in Iran. And so he has to come and make Israelis feel a lot better if he wants to regain their trust. And that's what a lot of this tour is about. Netanyahu, in September in the United Nations, set a deadline for preventing the nuclearization of Iran in what he called spring-summer. So when is Obama coming to Israel? On the first day of spring, to make sure that they're on the same page regarding Iran. We in Israel interpreted Netanyahu's speech a little bit different. We heard spring-summer, and we thought of the only month that's in both spring and summer, which is June. And what's happening in Iran in June? There's an election. What happened the last time you had an election in Iran? Protesters. They were very upset that the election wasn't allowed to be democratic. And then the world leaders, when there were protesters on the street there, did they help them out? No, they let them down. Perhaps the Arab Spring would have begun earlier, would have been a Muslim Spring, started a year earlier, if the world leaders would have helped out the pro-democracy protesters in Iran. But they didn't, they failed, which resulted in the people of Iran suffering for 4 more years. Perhaps this time the world will have learned its lesson and help the people when they go to the streets in June, when the election is going to be apparently no more democratic than the last one was. And so there is new hope that the nuclearization of Iran can be prevented by non-military means, that the sanctions are going to intensify between now and June, to come to a head in June, and then the people by then will be so upset that the regime will realize we either give up our nuclear program or we lose power. Keep in mind that the regime is under a lot of pressure from these sanctions. They are losing, because of lost oil and gas revenue, $140 million every single day. So, Netanyahu in a speech 3 days ago to the AIPAC policy conference, where I know there were a lot of people from Utah, including from BYU there, he said that historically sanctions haven't worked unless they're combined with a credible military threat. That ironically, the only time that Iran stopped their nuclear program was when the United States invaded Iraq, and Iran thought we must be next. That ironically, the way to avoid military action is to have a military threat. And so that is what Ehud Barak, our Minister of Defense, tried to explain a couple days ago in his meeting at the Pentagon with Chuck Hagel. Among the first things that Chuck Hagel did as your Secretary of Defense was to meet with the Israeli Minister of Defense, and that shows how close the two countries are. And so they're going to try to keep that relationship as close as it's been, which is extremely important. And as Barak also made clear to him, preventing the nuclearization of Iran is also the key to stability in the Middle East and the key to the success of what was optimistically called at the beginning the Arab Spring. Right now, it's not looking too spring-like. With Bashar Assad murdering 50,000 of his own people in Syria, it's an absolute tragedy that the world is not doing anything about it, that the world doesn't seem to care when such a thing happens in a country in the Middle East that has no oil. You would think that I would be happy about what's going on in Syria, because these are people who hate Israel. I mean, I know you in your international relations classes here, they might teach you that concepts like the enemy of your enemy is your friend, and better the devil that you know than the devil you don't know. Not true in the Middle East. In the Middle East, the enemy of your enemy is your enemy. And the devil that you know and the devil you don't know, both devils. And yet, we Jewish people, when pain happens to our enemies, we cry. We've got a Passover Seder coming up in another 3 weeks. At the Passover Seder, how many cups of wine do we drink? 4 cups of wine minus 10 drops. Why minus 10 drops? We dip our finger into the cup of wine and we drip out 10 drops because there were 10 plagues that hit the Egyptians pretty hard. And we're upset about that. Why are we upset? The Egyptians were nasty. They enslaved my people. Why is that sad? that they went through pain. We should be happy about that, but no. We in Israel are merciful people. And even though those plagues came from God and were deserved, we feel bad about what they went through, and our cup cannot be full. And so in Syria, what's happening there makes us sick to our stomach, and we want the people there to have a better day ahead, and we want the world to help the people. We in Israel are doing what we can to help. We're welcoming Syrians who have fled into our hospitals and treating them. That's what we do when there's disasters around the world. People who aren't Jewish, people in Haiti, in East Asia, whenever there were natural disasters, Israel was always the first country there saving lives. We're striving to be the light into the nations that our prophets said we would be. And so in this region, though, things in a way are getting better for Israel. The very fact that the Syrian army, that's a strong army built by Russia in order to destroy Israel, is self-destructing is not a bad thing. The fact that in Egypt the people have realized that Islamic fundamentalism, little by little, they're realizing is not the best way for them to go. It sends a message to the rest of the region. The fact that the world understands better than ever what Israel's up against in this region is a very good thing. And so we in Israel, even though we don't know yet what direction the region is going to go, and even though we don't know yet whether there's going to be an existential threat from Iran, and even though we don't know yet where our final border is going to be, we're not going to wait for the answer to those questions. We're going to continue to thrive against all odds. And I think our election proved it. Our election in Israel, where people didn't vote on war and peace for the first time, showed that we're becoming more of a healthy society. We voted on internal issues just like you do in America. We're becoming a little bit more of a normal country. We can have an election on the economy too. That at the age of 65 almost, our birthday is in May of this year, we'll be becoming 65. We're finally at that age maturing. We're finally growing up. And I think that bodes well for Israel's future. I think that life in Israel is going to continue to get better and better and better with the help of God, and I hope also for the Palestinians and for all the people of this region. And I hope that life will also get better for everyone here in America. Thank you very much. Okay, so I purposely left time for people to ask questions. Feel free to ask about anything you've ever wondered about what's going on in Israel or in this exciting region. And when I call on people, just say your name, that's all, before you ask your question. Yes, sir?
Tanner Sperry. What countries do you trade with Israel from the Middle East, like oil or anything?
So Israel has peace with two of its neighbors, with Jordan and with Egypt. In Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood leadership there would have loved to break the peace agreement with Israel, but they've got billions in American aid dependent on them keeping that peace agreement. And frankly, if you give me a few billion, I'll love whoever you want me to love. And so they're keeping the peace agreement not out of a love of Zion, but out of a love of American money. And so the trade with Egypt has continued, and with Jordan and with Turkey, which is, this is an old map, so Turkey's not yellow. It's become more yellow, more of an Islamic country than it was before. So even though Israel's relations with Turkey have downgraded significantly over the last several years, on a political level and on a tourism level, the rest of the, on a trade level, it's stayed strong. But our major trading partners in Israel are the European Union and the United States. And one of the top exports of Israel is microchips. The Pentium chip, Centrino chip inside your laptop, invented by Israelis. Flash drive, invented by Israelis. Voicemail, text messaging. There's been talk on college campuses of boycotting Israeli products. Good luck. Wow, now people have... Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm Caroline Slater, and I was just wondering how Secretary of State John Kerry's appointment affects the relationship between U.S. and Israel, or if it even does, if it would do the same?
John Kerry has a lot of energy and a lot of experience in dealing with the Middle East. For his main experience in the Middle East over the last 2 decades was telling the world that the ultimate peace partner for the United States is the Assad family. He was the main proponent of the Syrian regime in Washington for so many years. Now he's realized that was kind of a mistake, but that didn't stop him from being appointed as the Secretary of State. And so now, just like at the beginning of the last administration, there was a lot of vigor to solve the Middle East peace process. You know, the day after the inauguration, Obama appointed George Mitchell as a Middle East envoy. This time also, there's no doubt that Kerry is going to come in and be very active, for better or for worse. Now, America became less active over time over the last 4 years, in part because Hillary Clinton seemed to peter out. She seemed to run out of energy, and now Kerry is there with new energy. It's going to be exciting next 4 years. There in the back. Yes, sir. Either one of you.
Okay, I'll go. My question, I've heard some people argue that Iran, the military threat, isn't there as much because, since they have so much of their, centrifuges and stuff underground, and, militarily, it's, besides, trying to invade the whole country, there's not too much we can do. Do you feel like there's truth to that argument, or?
Okay, so what's your name?
I'm Daniel Folsom.
Daniel, so there's no doubt that preventing the nuclearization of Iran is much harder than it was when Israel prevented the nuclearization of Syria in 2007. Bashar Assad could have had the bomb, imagine that. And when Israel prevented the nuclearization of Iraq, now it's been 1981, a long time now. And America, of course, condemned Israel back then. And then later on thanked Israel for preventing Saddam Hussein from getting the bomb. So it's definitely harder because you've got, as you point out, a lot of different facilities, and some of them are underground, under a mountain. You know here how tough mountains can be. Yet it can be done, but you have different expectations depending on who would do it. You'll never hear an Israeli leader say that Israel can destroy the nuclear facilities in Iran. You hear them say that they can set them back significantly. Now, there's a cultural difference in Israel. When we are not long-term strategic thinkers like you are in America. When somebody says you can set something back by a year or two, to Israeli ears, that sounds great. Anything can happen in a year or two. To American ears, that sounds like nothing. Americans plan summer vacations 2 years in advance. And so Americans don't set things back significantly. Americans destroy. And they can destroy. They have bunker-busting bombs that we don't have. And so it would be easier if America would do it. But Israel can also be very effective in setting the Iranian nuclear program back. Further in the back over there, yes, ma'am.
Lucy Scouten. I was wondering, I spoke with several Israelis in December, and they suggested that peace would come between the Palestinians and the Israelis through the economy, and that because of the need for cooperation economically. And so do you think this election is, I guess, a good sign of that, of maybe even a one-state solution with everybody needing to work together economically?
Wow. Not quite. The economy is the key, but the one-state solution is only something that fringes on both sides would support. There's going to be 2 states for 2 peoples. That's what the overwhelming majority of Israelis support. On the Palestinian side, there are polls that still show that a majority of Palestinians favor the destruction of the state of Israel, unfortunately. A very comprehensive poll taken by Stanley Greenberg that you can find online pretty easily. And that's really unfortunate. But it would be 2 states for 2 peoples, but you're absolutely right, Lucy, that the economy is the key. Shimon Peres wrote a book, our president, 20 years ago now, called The New Middle East. And if you listening to Netanyahu over the last 4 years, he sounds more and more like him. And Netanyahu's campaign 4 years ago focused on what was called economic peace, on improving the lives of the Palestinians. And they had an election coming up that has since been delayed over and over again, where Netanyahu hoped that if he would improve the lives of the Palestinians by creating thousands of jobs for them, that they would elect moderate leaders that we could make a deal with. This was the plan that he presented to Obama and other world leaders, and the reaction of the world leaders to Netanyahu's plan of reaching out to the Palestinian grassroots was to laugh at him. They said, what do you mean you're going to be reaching out to the people? These are the Palestinian leaders. And Netanyahu said, I'm serious, not just with the Palestinians, the entire Arab and Muslim world. Stop reaching out to the dictators who don't care about their people. Reach out to the people. And the world leaders laughed at him, and when the Arab Spring broke out a year later, they realized he was right. Do we have a last question before people have to go to school, class? I can stay longer. Okay. I don't like when there's to choose, but the lady over here. Yeah.
I'm second. I was just wondering, when you said most Israelis would like a two-state solution, what kind of borders are they thinking of, like after 1967? And what are you for settlers in the West Bank?
So in the final status agreement, the border won't be where it was between 48 and 67. There's nothing holy about that line. That was just an armistice line in Israel's War of Independence in 1948. The borders will be decided in negotiations and peace talks between the two countries. And then the overwhelming majority of the Jews in the West Bank can actually stay because they're in settlement blocks that are right by the border. But you're still talking about 80,000 Jews having to lose their homes, which is something that would be very painful. I'm purposely answering questions quickly. In back of you, there was a question.
You mentioned that the Palestinian leadership is weak, and that's why the peace process has fallen apart. In mainstream Israeli view, what would need to happen so that a cohesive, strong Palestinian leadership would happen so that the peace process could be successful?
Well, first of all, there would have to be a unity government temporarily of the Palestinians in the West Bank, which is run by Fatah and the Hamas-run Gaza Strip, in order to facilitate a Palestinian election. And then there would have to be a Palestinian leader elected who would not be Hamas. It would have to be someone who would have a mandate from his people to advance the peace process with Israel. We hope that would happen, and it can happen. The latest polls are showing that support for Hamas among Palestinians has fallen dramatically. And there was a last question, somebody on that side. Okay, all the way over there, yeah.
My name is David Lutz. What steps has Israel taken in the past to push back Iran's nuclear program?
There have been viruses inside Iran and scientists who have gone poof in the night. Whether Israel was involved in that or just America, I don't know for sure. What I'd like to end with, people always ask me, what can I do to help Israel from where I live? And I tell people that it's EASY, EASY, which stands for education, advocacy, solidarity, and your prayers. So education, keep on learning about what's going on in Israel. Read the Jerusalem Post, www.jpost.com. Download the app. I'm Gil_Hoffman on Twitter, and always looking for new people to follow what's going on in Israel through me. A is for advocacy. We need all the help we can get in supporting Israel. And S is for solidarity, which you showed by coming here. And Y, your prayers are appreciated and I hope effective. Thank you very much.